Value for money and value for many. So in other words, accessing a large number of people. Not only in its cost, certainly reduced cost typically makes a product or service more accessible, but also because typically the business models created around these products and services are more accessible as well. And I'll share a couple of those with you a little later. To your customers, and understand their deep needs, not what you think they want, their deep needs, and then you start iterating, you start creating model after model, and it's usually in a low resolution kind of way so that it's not a high cost. That's what they did. They were just students. They didn't have investment backing at that time, though they do now. So eventually they came up with the model that you see here. They have two of them. One is about $200. It can be warmed through electricity, but we all know that in many rural areas, there isn't consistent access to electricity, and even in some urban areas. So they have another model where it can be warmed through hot water. You warm it up, and it can keep consistent at 37 degrees or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 hours. It's pretty impressive. And so they went back to the market, and they took this iteration, and you can see one of the huge advantages of this over a traditional incubator is you can actually hold the baby, right? So I actually think this is better than expensive incubators that can be $20,000 or $100,000. And what they did is they found the use increased pretty significantly. However, instead of 37 degrees, the mothers were keeping these at about 33, 34 degrees, something like that, less than what it should be. And they couldn't figure out why. And it turned out that the mothers here in Nepal, in that region, felt like Western medicine was too strong. Okay? So, for example, if maybe you were using a cough syrup instead of a home remedy, and that recommends 2 teaspoons for your child, maybe they would only give half a teaspoon or something like that. So similarly, the mothers were adapting based on their perception of Western medicine. So they went back and iterated again. And by the way, they went through many, many iterations. Some they first hand-stitched, then they got to 3D printing, which I think is a tremendous tool for entrepreneurs. It's not that accessible yet, but I think that's going to change just in a matter of even months. And what they did is, instead of having a gauge on the front of the pouch that says the temperature, they actually had something that said okay or not okay. What I mean by this is a lot of times what you observe in your customers is a lot more important than what they tell you. Whether you're giving them a survey or asking them, it's different than being in the field and understanding how they actually behave. So that is something that I think is extremely important for entrepreneurs. I do think a lot of you know this more than larger entities, but that is the observation of your customers will drive an innovation that actually grows and meets their needs. The Gini index today in the US is parallel to that of the Philippines or Mexico. And one of their senior executives said, we never realized we have a bottom of the pyramid right here in the US, and this I think is a trend that's emerging globally. And that's why it's even more and more important for US and Western entities to take a look at India, take a look at the approach to innovation here. They are collaborating. Partnerships I think are extremely important, not only for large organizations, but for smaller organizations. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see to entrepreneurs and small businesses is the ability to scale, right? Later, after this session closes, if any of you have some maybe personal case studies about how you're attempting to scale, I'd be really interested to hear those. But partnering is one of those ways. Just a quick example is they were trying to print some jokes on a potato chip, and they didn't have the technology for it. If they did it themselves, it would take 2 years. What they did is they found a professor in Bologna, Italy, who had this technology to print on pizza dough, and partnered with him in that university to bring this product to market in 6 months instead of 2 years. So that's the power of partnership. That is the power of knowledge sharing, okay? Basically, if we had to look at this new approach to innovation, we had to think about what is the way that currently innovation happens, right? And we found that in developed economies, people and developing economies, typically there was a kind of a what if question, right? A lot of you are asking those questions. What if I can provide low-cost healthcare services to patients in rural Tamil Nadu, for example? But we found that in developed economies, that the what if questions are typically more incremental. They're not big breakthroughs. They're just incremental. Like on the left here, you have a Japanese consumer electronics company, and they had a mobile that could control kitchen appliances, which is pretty cool, but basically incremental. On the right, you have a Jugaad innovator from India who asked the question, which was much more fundamental. What if I could create a refrigerator that doesn't require electricity? Okay? A lot of you have heard of Mitti Cool, I'm sure, right? So it's a clay refrigerator that does not require electricity, uses water to cool, developed by an innovator who doesn't have much education. He had access to very little capital, and he certainly doesn't have an R&D lab. But what he did have was a deep knowledge of clay, and he had this flexible, frugal, inclusive mindset. I think we don't have time for the films, but essentially, I think his is a great example of what happened is he was inspired when there was the earthquake in Gujarat. He saw a picture in the newspaper where there was this broken matka, and it said, "Poor man's fridge destroyed." And he said, well, maybe I can actually make a fridge for the people of my community, which is amazing. I mean, that was a pretty, his life was basically turned around as it was for many other people in that community. That is finding opportunity in adversity. It was flexible thinking. He also included the margin. In other words, he, through this model, created education for a lot of the women in the community so that they could help him make his products, earn income, gain status, feel prideful. It's a tremendous example. I'm going to have to unfortunately skip a couple of examples, but basically, Jugaad innovation also requires that we rethink what sustainability is, right? Because a lot of these models aren't just about driving money. It's not just about revenue. Often we find there are ecosystems involved, right? So there's usually an inclusiveness, sometimes there's an environmental benefit, and certainly there's usually a socioeconomic benefit as well. And I think the reason I like to show this slide is, even though my publisher doesn't like it, that somebody's selling bootleg copies of our book, I like it because it demonstrates something really important. Somebody recently wrote an editorial in the Times of India about our book saying, you know, you're talking about Jugaad and frugality and low cost, but you don't even have a paperback edition. It's just hardcover. It's too expensive. And you know what? The market will take care of that itself. And that's what I love about this example. Not to mention, if the bootleggers are willing to print your book, then it's probably all right. But importantly, that is my message. If you don't find the frugal, flexible, and inclusive solution, somebody else will do it for you. But as a group of entrepreneurs and small business owners, I have a lot of confidence that you will do that yourselves. Thank you very much.